We are Christina,
Oneida,
Alicia,
Colleen.
Welcome to 4NP's podcast.
This is a podcast by 4NPs. 4NPs, advanced practice nurses, students, and anyone interested in the medical arts.
That's the number 4 NPS podcast.
If you have a topic you'd like to see covered, please feel free to email us at 4npspodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us through our social media.
Hi, and welcome to episode 3 of our podcast. Today, we're going to kind of pick up where we left off on episode 2. We're going to discuss a little bit further CV versus resume. And for that, we're going to have Alicia discuss that a little bit further.
So we're going to discuss a resume versus a CV. And a lot of times people think they are the same, and sometimes people will use CV versus resume interchangeably, but they are actually very different. And actually, I didn't know this myself because I've always just used a resume. I mean, I've heard people use the word CV, and I kind of never was like, oh, okay, CV. And again, like I was one of those people that thought it was the same thing. So in looking up some of the differences, I went to a couple of websites. One was Resume Nerd. I did see that there's a website called Express CV Builder, which has templates you can use. ResumeNow.com. Indeed also has tips and links on building your resume or your CV. But just to go into a little bit of some of the differences, where would you do a CV versus a resume? And it really depends on the field or the particular job you're interested in. So CV, what that stands for is curriculum vitae, which actually is from the Latin, meaning course of life. And I found this interesting. Actually, one of the first known CVs written was by Leonardo da Vinci in the 1940s, where he wanted to get work in Milan. So he actually sent a letter to the city's registrant or something, and then he offered up his many skills, like his ability to build architectural structures. He offered his skill with sculpture and etc. But some of the primary differences would be the purpose and the length of it. So a CV is an overview of someone's life, their work, over the entire course of their work history. So up to that point. So a resume is much more precise, and it's targeted and it's brief. So your resume would be 1 to 2 pages. The resume is meant to prove your qualifications for a specific job. Because it's tailored to a particular position, it includes relevant work, experiences, and skills, whereas a CV is more like a biography. So it's much more comprehensive. It includes research, education, publications, achievements, etc. This could be several pages and actually up to 5 to 6 pages. But of course, you'd want to make it readable because who maybe wants to read 5 or 6 pages of a person's life. But again, depending on the position, you could also present a condensed or an abbreviated version of a CV. It depends again on what that employer is looking for. And you could always ask them, and you could make that CV a little bit more focused. But back to resume. So your resume is going to include your basic info, your name, your phone, your email. Make sure your email is professional sounding. You'd have a summary of your qualifications and how you add value to a particular position. You'd want to list your work experience in chronological order, your most recent to oldest. And then you'd have your skills, your education, certifications, special training, awards, any professional affiliations, and volunteer work. The CV would also include that information, such as your basic info, education, and work experience, but then you'd also be including a dissertation or any thesis work in a brief summary of the topic. Your research would include what your role was in that research, any significant findings. You'd be listing skills, your publications, your honors, your awards. So that would basically, in brief, describe a curriculum vitae. So you choose a CV over a resume in fields such as academia, creative arts, medical arts, and positions requiring more in-depth view, and positions that call for greater degree of expertise or specific training. So again, as I mentioned in the beginning, there's several websites you could go to that help with templates and building CVs and resumes. Some of them do have a fee, cost a little bit of money to get started, but there's definitely some great resources online. So I hope that helps a little bit in differentiating what the CV versus the resume is.
I know in the research field, a CV is what's typically used, but that's because it doesn't usually involve research and publication. So That would
Right.
be the reason for that.
Exactly.
The other thing you want to list on your CV or resume is your credentials, those initials after your name. And so we just wanted to say, I know when I first graduated with my FNP, I wasn't really sure what's the proper way and the proper order to put the initials that go after your name. And on nurse.org, they have a little article about that. And it says that you're to list your highest education first. So your highest degree. So if you're a bachelor's RN or an associate RN, you'd put that. We have a master's in nursing, so we are MSNs. So it would be your name, MSN, then your licensure. Your first licensure is an RN because nurse practitioners maintain their RN license. So you would put RN and then you would put FNP, which is your family nurse practitioner in our case. If you were an ANP or an advanced practice nurse, whatever those credentials are that came with your master's degree, you would put that. And then you would put any certification that you have. So in the case of the four of us, we have the same credentials. So we'd be our first name, last name, MSN, RN, FNP-BC. So that would be how you would present that. So now you got the job. So what happens next?
So congratulations on getting your job. And I'm sure you're full of emotion, stress, and anxiety. There's a lot that has to happen, especially on your first job, because you don't really have anything. I mean, you have your nursing or your nurse practitioner license that you would have already received in the mail at some point after graduation. So that's very important. But then there's so many other identifiers that you still need to have, especially if you're going to be practicing clinical practice, whether it's primary care, mostly primary care, but any specialty, they're important. And those include your NPI number, your DEA, and that's for prescribing narcotics. And then part of that is your CAQH. So not every organization is going to kind of walk you through, hold your hand and walk you through all of this. It's nice when they do because it's so unknown and foreign that you don't know where to even start. So the whole point of this podcast and this episode is to kind of give you insight into how you can approach it and what you need to know, and because you may not have this information from your organization. So your nursing license, your nurse practitioner license, is super important. A lot of times if you're doing telehealth visits, especially now with, that's been more mainstream lately, especially with COVID, telehealth is really important and it's utilized a lot. Part of your documentation has to include your nursing license. So it's not a very long number, so it's important to memorize, if you can, those, I think it's 6 digits minus the letter. So it's important to always memorize that. And a lot of times your MA or your support staff will have that written somewhere because they may need to give that to somebody, whether it's a pharmacy, whoever, if they're helping you out in signing prescriptions for you, sending prescriptions, doing verbal prescriptions. It's important that they have that information. So again, that's something easy and you'll get in the mail when you apply to the Office of Professions for your nurse practitioner license. The other thing is your NPI number. So an NPI number is your National Provider Identifier. So it's a 10-digit number that's used to identify you to your healthcare partners, including all payers. So it's important to have that, obviously, and to apply for that. That's something you need to be able to do, and you can search that online. Again, it's if you're billing Medicare and Medicaid, which as a provider, you're going to be doing that. So you need to have that NPI number. So you don't need to be a nurse practitioner to have an NPI number. As an RN, you're able to even have that. I did as an RN when I worked in home care. I had an NPI number, and that was because I was billing Medicare and Medicaid. So I obtained that years earlier, and I actually forgot I had one. And when I went to go reapply, it already showed that I had one, but I was listed as an RN, and it actually caused not problems, but when people look me up, it still shows that I'm an RN in some places, but then it shows that I'm an NP in other places. So it can be a little confusing for people. But some healthcare providers can obtain an NPI number without actually being providers. So just a note to self. So like I said, the NPI number is super important, and I don't have mine memorized. That's just too many numbers for me. But it's good to have that readily available, because if you're calling in a prescription into pharmacy, sometimes they'll ask for your NPI number to identify you as a provider and to identify your name associated with your NPI number. So the next thing that's important to have, again, your organization when you get hired may prompt you on all these different identifiers that you're going to need, but they may not tell you exactly how to get there. They may say, oh, by the way, you need to have your DEA license, which my organization did once I got hired. Actually, in the hiring process, they asked me if I had one, and I did not. I hadn't worked as an NP at that point, so I didn't, think to get one yet. And honestly, it's expensive. And I was like, oh gosh, am I going to have to incur the cost of the DEA license? It's very expensive. It is $888. And from other people and other friends that I knew, they were like, oh, your organization should cover that.
Oh, good.
That is mostly true, but not always the case. So I waited, and thankfully they did say they would cover it, but I had to start the process on my own. So it wasn't awful. I was a little afraid when I saw the cost, and then it kind of tells you in bold red letters when you go to the website and go to apply that once you move forward, your money is not going to be reimbursed if you make a mistake or if you have an error. So just be cautious about when you go to apply, you're making sure you're putting all your correct information, which is really self-explanatory. It's just personal information. But DEA stands for Drug Enforcement Agency License. So it regulates both the prescribing and the distribution of controlled medications, such as narcotics and sedatives. So when you go to apply for your DEA, it's going to ask you to include what drug class schedules you're allowed to prescribe. I wasn't even sure about that. So I just listed 2, 3, 4, and 5. So your DEA license has different drug classes. Some of those drug classes include narcotics, depressants, stimulants, hallucinogens, and anabolic steroids. So as a provider, I wasn't sure, am I going to be providing all those medications? Should I be checking off the box to prescribe all those medications? Am I allowed to as an NP in New York State? I really wasn't sure. So initially, I just checked off 2, 3, and 4, which were narcotics, depressants, and I believe stimulants. Then when I got to my practice, I went to prescribe, I think it was Adderall, and the pharmacy kicked it back and said I wasn't allowed to prescribe that because I didn't have the schedule listed on my DEA license. So then I was like, oh my gosh, but that doesn't make sense, because I knew the other NP that was working there was able to, and further investigation, I knew I could. So I was like, what do I do now? I'm stuck. Oh my gosh, do I have to pay $888 to get a different DEA license? That's just crazy.
So stressful.
So long story short, I called the number that I was given by my provider, another provider there. And when I called, they said, oh, don't worry about it. It's okay. You can just go back. He gave me the website to go to, click this, and then I basically had to edit my own information.
Right.
Once I did that, I didn't have to pay any money. They issued me a new DEA license with all the schedules. So all the schedules would be 2, 2N, 3, 3N, 4, and 5.
Great.
So then I was able to resubmit that Adderall.
Woo!
And I was good to go.
Nice.
But no, I'm being funny. I wasn't able to.
Oh, okay.
Another provider had to submit that request, which he did. He did remind me. He's like, I guess I'll do it, even though it's not my patient. But he was really understanding. And then it did happen within 3 days. I got my new license in the mail. So it was really quick. Good. And I didn't have to wait for it to come in the mail. once it was submitted, it literally was like within 24 hours.
Cool.
So that worked out to my benefit. But again, I want to make sure the audience hears that, because that's just something, a little tidbit you can just take and like put in your pocket and say, okay, when it comes time for my DEA licensing, I need to be aware of that. So the other area of importance is your CAQH. Again, when I was given an email with all these things that I had to follow through on, this was listed there, and I was like, oh my gosh, what is a CAQH? Like credentialing. They gave me a website I had to go to. So once you go to the website, so basically CAQH, it's Council for Affordability Quality Healthcare. It's basically a credentialing database used by healthcare providers, hospitals, and healthcare organizations. So they basically, all your information is in one area. So all these organizations and providers and hospitals can go to one specific location and access all your professional information, your professional IDs, your education and professional training, your specialties, your practice locations, your hospital affiliations, your credentialing contacts, your professional liability insurance, your employment information, your professional references. So it encompasses a lot in one location. And that's important as a healthcare provider to have that information readily available, because you're billing insurance companies, you're affiliated with other healthcare organizations, so they need to be able to have that information on hand, so that way there's no lapse in credentialing and billing, and it's just very useful, and it's really important. So basically, it's like it said it was an online data repository of credentialing data that was useful for all providers. So it encompasses a lot of information in one area. So that's really important. And again, it's a little bit more time consuming. It's like filling out almost like a CV, Alicia. You like have to go back and like input all this information. CAQH does require you to review and attest every 120 days. So you'll get an email every 120 days looking for an update. You can't just click, oh yeah, update. Like you have to like literally go in and review everything and update specific information. And it'll have requests of certain areas that it needs you to update. I just did mine when I went to go review for this. I looked and it was like, oh, you have an attestation due in like a week. I'm like, all right, let me just do it now. So it took me like 15 minutes to go through it and make sure everything was up to date. And then like basically sign saying it's good for the next 120 days.
Oneida, do you have the website for that? They didn't ask me to do that when I credentialed for my company.
It's ProView.
Yes.
ProView.caqh.org/PR.
I was going to ask, is that specialty specific? Like if you're in primary, like because Colleen, you're saying you didn't have to do it. I mean, is it just depending on your office or what specialty you're in, or?
It's everything.
Pretty much everyone. Oh, okay.
It is. Yeah. So when I started working for the first organization I worked for, they did everything for me. So when I went to my second office, I was supposed to have done it and I didn't do it. And it just caused a problem. So some organizations are very organized and some are just like kind of throw you in and, you kind of have to learn to swim on your own. So.
Yeah. Now, is there an annual fee to be in this database, or how does that work?
No.
Free.
Oh.
Once you go to that website, it's going to ask you to create a login and a password, of course. That login and password I actually had to share with the human resource person who was handling my credentialing, because they then go in and input their part of their information, like my liability insurance. That is through the organization I work with. So they have to put in all that specific information. And it's nice because I was able to print out a copy of my professional liability insurance through the organization. So, I mean, you have access to all this information. So, but again, you have to share your login and password because they, again, have to put in their portion of what's needed to actually for the credentialing.
Do they reattest for you then?
No.
Because I feel like my first organization, they reattested for me.
Oh.
Because I never touched it. I didn't touch it.
That's interesting.
And I just, toward the end of my second job, then they were like, can you do this? And I was like, I don't know what that is. I had to figure out what it is. So,
I was getting the emails for attestation, so I just assumed it was my job to do.
Yeah.
But I didn't even consider that, Christina.
I don't know.
I do have a question about the DEA license. So I have my DEA license also, but I don't know. I do know that I had to register with New York State also and do some training and some other things, which I did. But how do you get, I know when I was in rotations, the nurse practitioner I worked for had a little key fob that she, with a USB on it, that she would put into her computer whenever she was prescribing something that was scheduled. How would I get that? Like I don't know this. I don't know the answer to that. Like
I use a VPN. So I go on and I got that through, I think, Human Resources.
Okay.
And whenever I go to prescribe a narcotic, I put in the information, and then at the end it gets to a screen, and then I have to go onto something on my phone, and they give me a special password. I don't know. What do you do, Oneida?
So the way I do it, so the website, and again, I was familiar with this from my previous job in the school district working as a nurse practitioner, because as far as like for students and looking up immunization records and stuff, it all goes through the New York State Health Commerce System. Mm-hmm. You have to create a user ID and a password. And if I remember correctly, the IT department there, I'm sorry, not the IT department. I had to call a certain number for this health commerce system, and they helped me create a user ID, or they gave me a user ID. And then I created a password, which was my own, to log in.
That's for iStop. Are you talking about iStop?
That's for iStop, yes. What
this is
you
for
were talking about?
Like a special, like I had to use a VPN. I remember working with Linda. She had that key thing that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you like? Isn't there a extra step that you have to do when you order a narcotic?
So as far as the logging in, I have Imprivata as well, just like Christina has Imprivata. And when I go to prescribe a controlled substance through my Cerner, which is the program that I use, there's a box where it has a check mark, and I have to check that stating that I've accessed iStop, and that I have assured that, I've done my part in making sure that they're eligible for a controlled substance that hasn't been prescribed anywhere else, blah, 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 blah. Once I do that, I click on it and then I hit sign. Then a window comes up where it tells me on that same screen, and I have to enter in my password for Imprivata. Once I enter in my password for Imprivata, you have to have access on a phone or somewhere to then allow you to approve that request. And like for Christina and I, it's Imprivata on our phones. And once I get a code, a serial number, it'll give me 30 seconds to hit approve or deny. If I don't hit approve within that 30 seconds, it's okay. I can still use a code, and I just have to type that code into that screen on the computer where I'm prescribing, and then it'll approve it that way.
Okay.
So, even though you don't have to have it done in 30 seconds, but you still have to put in that serial number.
And then do you have to put the iStop number, right?
So then what I do is, when I access PMP for a patient to make sure that no one else has prescribed it and that we're good to go on timing, that it's not too soon, whatever, there's a reference number. When you look up a patient's information, it shows a reference number and the time you actually looked it up. So then I take and I have a little blurb that I have written that I save, and then I just cut and paste it onto my desktop in Cerna, and then I go back to iStop, cut and paste the reference number, and cut and paste the time. And that you have to do that whenever you're prescribing controlled substances, because it assures that you've done your part.
Right.
in making sure that they're eligible to have this controlled substance.
Yeah.
Or that you've checked, you've done the background checking.
It's easy to forget that too, because the system
Oh my gosh, I haven't. I'm like, oh my gosh,
yeah,
I have
it's
to
so
go back
easy
and
to
look.
forget, and you're like, oh.
And what's nice about a lot of organizations, most of the bigger organizations, is that you'll have an MA or an LPN. Their job too is to like go through when they get requests from patients for renewals of controlled substances, is they'll access, you give them, you go into iStop yourself and you designate people who obviously are part of your organizations as to have access to your iStop. So they can look up patients for you, and then they'll send you a proposal for a controlled substance. And in that proposal, it'll say iStop accessed, reference number,
Oh, that's
time,
great.
date. And then I just have to approve it. But be very careful that you are aware of your patients and what they're on, because you don't want to approve something that they just got or that is too soon for them to have.
That's another a topic for another day, is how to handle, especially in like a primary care, if you have a patient who, and I've seen this happen even just in my clinical rotation, a patient that comes in and, they're not eligible to get their narcotic for 2 or 3 days, but they want it and they want it now. And you're alone in the room with this person, and like that could go downhill really quickly.
Yep.
It's a really touchy situation to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And that always makes me nervous. Like, I just don't like the narcotics for that reason. But, if you're in a bigger practice, it's fine. But I was working with an NP who's by herself.
Right.
And she prescribes, and she did have a patient who was very angry. He, said he dropped the pills down the sink and he wanted them immediately. And she said, I can't do that. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Scary.
Scary. Yeah.
So there's a lot to be confronted with when you're just starting out. So it's important to listen to our podcast and know what is going to be expected of you as a provider. Not only like your knowledge base, but all the credentialing and, the licensing that goes along with that.
Just to get started.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot.
But you know what? It's a great thing to have and to know and to learn, because as stressful as it is and overwhelming as it can be at times, you learn so much from it.
So true.
So then what happens? So you're credentialed, and hopefully the company that hires you is going to walk you through that. But then what happens?
So then you get reimbursed that $888, woohoo. And
Not me.
you are set free to start prescribing and, and diagnosing and doing your job, basically. What I will say too, though, is I have yet to get a prescription pad. I know that's something I really need to do, because even though everything is e-scribed, and also if it's not e-scribed, as far as where I'm at, in the system that I'm using, you can do referrals and requisitions for things, including whether it's miscellaneous equipment.
Like DMEs or...
Yeah.
Right.
That you would write on a script. You can write it on a requisition form in a referral format, because it's got your signature and it's got all the information that's necessary, and you can edit and write in specific details if you want in comments. But just talking to a provider, if you're on call for your organization that you're with and you happen to get a call on the weekend, and which happens all the time, and you get somebody that wants a narcotic that is eligible to have narcotics, but didn't call in soon enough before the weekend and they've run out, and you need to prescribe 5 or 10 to get them through the weekend. The provider that I work with says he always likes to submit a hand one to the pharmacy, a handwritten one, just to make sure he covers himself. But anyway, I don't have a prescription pad. I need to have one. I feel like I've sent away for one, but I never followed up with it. But so that's something important you should always try to make sure you have as well.
And that's from the Health Commerce site, I believe,
Correct.
because I think I saw that there. Yeah.
I've done it 3 times.
You have.
Why,
to change
Christina?
Change your address.
Why?
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm not
You're
proud. I'm not
professional.
proud.
It's like, You should be proud. You're a
You should
professional.
be.
You weren't tolerating bad places to work. You were moving on.
But it's a headache because you have to like, you can't just, you have to go in and you have to change your DEA address before you can go back onto the commerce site. And then there's like that lag in time, just like there was a lag between like Oneida when you had to put in something for the commerce.
Oh, for my DEA, for my scheduling.
To change it.
To add more.
Yeah. So there's a lag in time, and then you gotta wait, and then you gotta, then you go on, and then you can order your pads. And you can order as many as you want, and they're all free. So the first time around, I was like, how many pads should I order? And the nurse practitioner was like, they're free. So I ordered 10 pads, which...
oh my gosh.
I think I used a quarter of one. And the second time around, I don't remember. I got like 5, and this time around I got 5. But anyways.
Well, if I ever do that, I'm going to get $888 worth since I had to pay for my own DEA license.
I had to pay for mine too. Like I paid for my... I asked, is it reimbursed? And they're like, yeah, we'll reimburse you after, so many months.
Oh, that's not right.
Yeah, and I wasn't there long enough, so... Yeah.
You should have been like, well, then I'll write prescriptions after so many months.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah.
No.
Anyways. It would have been nice. And I feel like it went up. Like when I first paid, I think it was like $750, and now it's
It did.
Yeah?
Yep. It just went up. Like I'm trying to think. I applied in April, and it was like right before that, because when I first graduated in May of 2020, it was cheaper.
Right? Yeah, I thought so.
Yep. And I do know a nurse practitioner that went ahead and got her DEA license on her own because she found that when she was looking for jobs, and I found this also, that a lot of them were expecting you to have your DEA license. And so she went ahead and got it herself, and she put in her home address, which I didn't do that because of what Oneida said earlier with that very scary statement that says when you're if you screw this up, you make a mistake, you don't put the right thing, you don't fill it out correctly, you're not getting your money back. And I was like, I'm not spending this money. And I don't think I could put my home address. Can I put my home address? Well, apparently you can put your home address. So, and at the time it was COVID, and so nobody was answering phones. I was calling, trying to get somebody to get an answer to that question. And then I just dropped it and said, I think because I had spoken to you guys, and by that point you were already done with all your credentialing, and you were like, no, the place where you're going to work is going to take care of that. So
Yeah, that's good.
But then the place where I work doesn't take care of it.
But is it tax write-off?
For me, it's a tax write-off because I have my own business, so I can write that off. The company that I work for as a nurse practitioner, I'm just per diem there. I think if I was a full-time nurse practitioner for them, which I don't know that they have many full-time nurse practitioners. I think most of them are contracted or per diem. But I was told, because I did ask, that if you're a full-time employee for them, then they would cover it. However, they get around that by not having any full-time nurse practitioners.
Exactly.
So I guess all the nurse practitioners either had to have it in hand or were new like me and had to get it themselves. So I think, so then once you're credentialed, do you get your job offer before you are credentialed, or do they wait until you're credentialed before they give you the written offer?
You get your job offer, and then you sign your contract, and then you do all that good stuff. Because it takes like, what? It depends. My first job, it took me...
Months. It was months. I remember I kept asking you. I was like...
Honestly, it was like 6 months.
Oh my gosh.
But that was my fault also because... you could do it at your own pace, and I had started another job, so you kind of take it at your own pace. Yeah, I was like, I'm in no rush.
Finishing up her nurse practitioner, working a full-time job, and then decides to just take a second job. Let me just take another job while I'm at it.
Why not?
In the ICU, no less.
I'm crazy. I'm legit crazy. But, yeah, so, I mean, it goes at your own pace, and then I've had my last one, I think it took me 2 or 3 months to be credentialed, so it just depends. But my second job, it was like they couldn't get me quick enough because she needed somebody, so I think it's just, it depends on how many people are in the organization and how efficient that, I guess, our human resources are. How long did it take you, Oneida?
It took me, I was hired in like early November and then I started in January. So it didn't take very long. They also like gave me a start date. And I mean, they did mention, okay, credentialing should take about 2 months, whatever, but this is going to be your start date. If we need to push it back, we'll push it back. But we didn't have to. And it was a really quick credentialing considering that it was my first job and I needed kind of everything done. I also was like really I made sure I was on target and on point with like getting all their requests. Like I was constantly getting emails from HR about what different things that I needed to have done and please finish this, please. So they were also really good about making sure they had their I's dotted and their T's crossed with me. So that I think helped out as far as the time frame for me to get credentialed. So
I did see it online that it's 6 weeks to 3 months is the average.
Not 6 months.
6 months. Not 6 months, but it can take longer also, of course. And, if you're like, you're laid back about it, that's okay.
What are you going to do? Some other things also that you should think about, like, again, my first organization, they were on top of everything. They sent me emails. It was bam, bam, bam. I didn't have to think about anything. They said, all I had to do was go on the sites and I had to make up a username and a password for like the NPI, I think, and the CAQH and the DEA. I think I did the DEA by myself. And then they did everything for me, like literally did everything for me. So that's why I was like so lost. But they were on everything. So, and then I was at my second office and it was like, I didn't know anything.
Night and day.
And it was like, and they didn't know anything. Exactly. Night and day. So it was like, I was literally doing stuff for them to get reimbursed, like on my way out the door. So, and then this third office is kind of like in the middle. So it just depends. Every organization is so different. It's crazy. But also the fun stuff like the lab coats and the business cards and the prescription pads and the first organization I was with, they had these cool notepads that you could like put notes on and put orders on and then sign it at the end. So it was kind of like a prescription pad also. So
nice.
Fun stuff like that I find fun.
Yeah,
I think
that is fun.
And the professional portraits, right? Did you have to do that?
Yeah. So I was like, I had to submit something that had my face on it, and it you were instructed for it not to have a background, so that way they could put it on the website as one of the providers now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I do that? Like it's like basically a passport photo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it was during COVID, and I was like, where am I going to go get this done? So, there's so many, everything is done. You can do everything online. So I just went, I downloaded a website or an app, and it was like, portraits or passport portraits or something like that. And I took my picture like 100 times and, and submitted that. I sent that through, and then, they did what they did and put it on the website. So it was pretty fun. But I have to say, I had a patient who came to me to establish care, and he said, towards the end of the visit, he said to me, you look younger and different, even though I had a mask on, than what your picture shows. And I was like, oh, because I have straight hair, because my hair is normally curly, but I blow it out straight. I'm like, oh, it's probably because my hair was straight. He's like, no, you look very different. I'm like, oh, okay. He was like,
was it your picture?
Like, I mean, like completely different. And I'm like, that's weird. He's like, actually, I don't even think it's you.
Oh no.
And I'm like, well, he said, let me pull it up because it's a little confusing to me right now. You're saying you're who you are, but your picture is showing. So when he pulled me up, it wasn't even me.
That's what I was about to say.
Yeah, I was like, that's not me. Actually, it was like, and nothing against like 50-year-old women or 55, but I'm just not there yet.
Hey,
she was like 15 years older than me. I'm like, this is so not okay.
Oneida, how old are you? 15 years.
Listen, you spring chicken. Watch the ageism there.
I'm not, but I'm getting there, and I want to get there when it's time.
You'll be there faster than you know it.
So what happened?
But you have to be careful. You know what? I honestly, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I haven't even followed up because I'm like so.
Oh my God! Look her up.
I'm gonna look you up right now.
That's so funny.
But that person is still under my name. We'll have to be continued.
That's a joke.
Is it? All right. I'm gonna call her.
I'm gonna look you up. I gotta look you up right now.
Oh my gosh.
I'm looking right now.
hilarious.
Hang on. This is hysterical. Oh no, there's just a little cartoon picture of a female nurse
I'm gonna die. Oh my gosh.
with a stethoscope around her neck and her blue hair in a bun.
Blue hair.
Oh, what?
Yay.
Yeah, I don't know how to show you guys this.
Oh yeah,
It's
I see it.
hysterical.
I see it. You've got 5-star ratings,
Yeah.
Oneida.
Oh,
I was going to tell her that. 31 ratings with 5 stars.
Shut
That's
up.
awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I do. I don't even
nice.
do my
Yes.
stuff.
You're
Yes.
a superstar, girl.
I'm gonna come to you. Oneida.
Yeah. 31 gave you 5 out of 5. Wow.
That's awesome. See, it's all worth. Doesn't that make you feel good?
Yeah, but it's
Here, I'm going to read one. Oneida,
Okay.
listen. It says, Oneida is the first provider that has taken the time to listen to me, go over my concerns, and come up with a plan of care that truly helped me. I wish all providers could be exactly like Oneida. Adding her to the practice was the best thing that could have happened. Because of her, I have quit smoking after 22 years. Thank you, Oneida, for
Stop
putting
it. Oneida, go ask
putting
for
the
more money.
care back in
Ask for more
healthcare.
money. Good for you.
Oneida,
That's right. You are
Oneida, you
valuable.
Maybe that's
you put
why,
the care back in healthcare.
That's amazing.
Maybe that's why when I went and requested my decrease and I was like feeling overwhelmed, she was like, anything you need.
Yes.
Well, thank you guys for making me feel good today.
That's
because,
great. We didn't. You did it. You did it.
Yeah.
I'm serious.
Who's doing this? Who is doing this work?
Oh, look at this. Here's another one. I needed to get my husband's opinion, and he didn't have his phone. Oneida went out to his car. She was great. Do you remember that one?
Do you remember that?
Yep. She was
Aw.
like, my husband's waiting in the car. And I was like, all right, well, give me 1 sec. I'll run out.
Oh,
Wow.
See, you're
You're
making a difference.
awesome.
That's great. The other things that can be different are the training for computer programs. What was your training like, Oneida?
Oh my gosh. I have to say that, you're again going into a new practice and this is your first role as a nurse practitioner and there's just so much you have to deal with. And on top of it, you have to learn a new computer system. So the organization I'm with had just IT readily available, not only readily available, but they actually had on-site people come and spend time just working with you directly on how to create shortcuts, how to access things, where to go. I mean, like A to Z, they were available. I had them on my phone, direct numbers to people for the first weeks. And I could have continued. I mean, even now I could reach out to them and they would help me in like a second. They were great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So for my same thing for my first organization, it was great. They offered to I think I declined, but they said we'll follow you the first day. So if you have any questions at all, we'll just be in the background and you can ask. And it was great. And I could email them at any time. And then my second place, they sent me an email and they said review this, and then I was expected to know it like backwards and forwards. And if I had a question, oh my God, I was the biggest idiot. So, isn't that
That's
great?
terrible to work in a place like that. That's not right.
Yeah. But
And, I think a good tip too with that, Christina, like what would you say could have tipped you off to know that? I mean, could you have known?
known what?
Were there warning signs? Was there like something that you just kind of ignored and kind of thought,
No, I didn't really know till I got there. Like I had no idea. And then it was just like, I was expected to know everything, including their software. And then it just, came to a head and then we had to, have it out. But that sometimes you just have to do that and figure it out. I don't think there was any warning signs other than it was like,
a small practice?
a small practice, yeah. But, especially when you're new, like how are you going to know that? I mean, I guess I should have known because the whole process was so much shorter, and there wasn't as much, I guess, contact and emails and whatnot. So yeah, I guess I should have known, but hindsight is 20/20. You just, I guess, you learn what you want and what you don't want.
Yeah, everything for a reason. You always learn something from the experiences that are less than desirable.
Yeah, and then you know what you never want to do again, and you go forward and
right.
Hopefully better situations.
Yeah, which it sounds like you're in a win-win situation now, so that's good.
I am. Yeah. I am. Kind of in the middle of both. So I think it's what is it? Who's the character? The bed, the three bears.
Goldilocks?
Yep.
Goldilocks? Yeah, Goldilocks.
That's me. Totally. You've got to be just right.
Exactly. Never give up.
Valuable lessons.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to us and give us 5 stars.
If you have any ideas or comments, please message us at 4npspodcast@gmail.com.
Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 4NPs Podcast. That's the number 4NPS Podcast. Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast, and go to our website at 4npspodcast.com for episode transcripts, resources, and more information about us.
Join us next week where we will take a dive into negotiating your contract and how to go about licensing in different states. The information in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be used in substitute for professional care by a medical provider. The information in this podcast does not represent medical or other professional advice or services. The thoughts and opinions presented on the 4NPs podcast are of the hosts and guests and do not represent those of their employers.